When I went to India, finally went to Dharamsala for my first visit and saw the need there. And, I just thought it was something that needed to happen. I was so upset with what I found when I went traveling through Tibet in 1988, and learned more about it. It just outraged me. So this would have been in December of 1995. So I ended up going over there to, study at the Menzigang, and it's a bit of a story, but I met Punzuk Namgyal, who's the director of the TCRC, and spoke with him at some length and explained to him what I, could do to help what they were planning to do. I said, I can help you out with this. So I went home, and I registered Tibet.org shortly after that in January of 1996. And then I got involved with the Tibet movement in other ways that really took me places I never expected. But at the same time, I kept talking to Punzuk Namgyal. Long story short, about a year and a half, a little less later, I landed in India with 4 friends and everything we needed to build the network so we could connect all the offices in Kangi and make a dial-in connection from the private office and the Norbert Link Institute and all these other places so that we could start to bring the Tibetan exile community in the government in exile into the internet age. When I went back with my team in April of '97, and they had more computers than they'd had a year and a half earlier, but they were still using the one email address, and anybody who sent email to Dharamsala, the emails would be printed out and they would staple them, and people would just have to know an email had come or hope an email had come and come to the office and get their little stapled message. The software you had to use to compose and write an email, it was this weird 5 or 6 step process that I could never quite get the hang of. Only one of my team could ever really get it down reliably. It was such a strange process, in order to just write and compose and send an email. And it was all coming in and out of the one email address. And the way the mails were being shipped in and out was through what's called a UUCP dial-up connection. It was a Unix to Unix computer protocol where they could call up another Unix computer in Delhi. It was run by a Sonam Darge, who was running the TibetNet office in Delhi. And they could just send things to that computer there. And then from Delhi, there was the internet connection through ERNet that would send the emails out to this tiny, tiny, tiny little connection that India had to the rest of the world at that time.
By the time when we started having higher or better internet connection, we have more vulnerable from the Chinese attack. That time they are not very well sophisticated. We can test out the source of the email. We can test out the proper IP, because that time they used their own IP address. Now it's completely changed because of the VPN and others technology. So we used to have a Trojan virus, and then sometime denial of DOS, denial of service, which we call technically we call it DOS. I had to do the press release twice in 2002 and 2004. I think 2004 was because they are attacking mostly on our overseas office, and then the websites. They try to send a malicious script in our email in the name of His Holiness office, or some office of Tibet. Or we do have some big conference like international conference for Tibet, or international conference for parliament. We call it a WPC meeting. So whenever we have a big conference, they try to attack in a month advance so that they will get all the information.
We didn't have a whole lot of trouble getting hacked ourselves at that time, but what the Chinese government started doing was sending out emails, spoofing somebody else's address and pretending they'd written an email. I remember the first, my full name is Daniel D. Haig, and they sent an email to the TSG list, the main Tibet, support group list, and it was supposedly from me, and it was written in very poor English, and they signed my name Haig D. Daniel, which is hilarious because everybody knows I sign my emails with just a dot and a D anyway, so it was very obviously fake. But then they got better at doing this sort of thing. And then they started, so they would try to get people to click on links to go to a website that would install malware. Then they started the very extensive campaign of sending emails with malicious attachments, which if you dared to click and open them, your computer would get infected and all manner of things might happen. That campaign ramped up very, very sharply ahead of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. They were trying to get their hands on everybody's computer, get their hands on everyone's phone numbers and telephones, and it was really extensive.
My name is Kate Wasno, and in 2007, I was the campaigns director of Students for Free Tibet. And I was helping to coordinate a series of pro-Tibet protest actions in Beijing and also around the world at the time that China was going to open its 2008 Beijing Olympics. So there had been the uprising in Tibet in March of 2008, and then this was August 2008. And I think the Chinese government was desperately trying to figure out what Students for Free Tibet was organizing, especially inside Beijing. So I was at the time based in Bangkok and using Skype to communicate with people who are based all around the world, including some people who were supporting the actions in Beijing. And all of a sudden, I had new requests, friend requests pop up in my Skype. And in one of them, an individual addressed me by the code name I had been using to communicate with various other Olympics coordinators. And those names I hadn't used very much. I definitely hadn't used them in email. Maybe at the time I remember we were using Hushmail. So it did weird me out. I remember thinking, oh, who is trying to contact me from my code name? And it was a Beijing number, and or it might have been a Hong Kong number. It was either Beijing or Hong Kong number, but they were clearly trying to figure out if I was in Hong Kong. So they were addressing me in a very personal way and actually asking if I was interested in doing business with them. And what struck me was that I had actually been in Hong Kong the year before, again, helping to support actions for Tibetan freedom.
Yeah, so the Cheng Li attack was a really, I would say, I don't want to give them too much credit, but was a very sophisticated, well-crafted email attack that came to me in 2012. And that just for a second for an instant, it really did. I did think not only that this was a legitimate email from a real person, but someone that I knew of, who was sort of a high profile person in the world of China experts and think tanks. And so it also had, because the attack included a request for me to look over his information about the self-immolations in Tibet, that email also for a second made me feel just good that such a person as Cheng Li would be looking into the self-immolations in Tibet, and that I was being asked to help. But I pretty quickly realized that it was likely a fake email, not really Cheng Li, because it included a sign-off that said "Happy Tib Losar." Yeah, I was glad. I was proud of myself for catching it. And I was hopeful that if I could catch it, then we were doing the right thing, because it was my training and my experience in digital security prep and work that had set off all these different alarm bells in my mind, though it was a sophisticated attack. And I really was hopeful that the work we were doing, I was gratified and believed even more that the work we were doing would make a difference in people's individual lives and also in the movement and beyond.
I realized that this was definitely a phishing kind of message, but there was a certain thuggishness about it too, as sort of, we know who you are and we'll figure out where you are. And for me, it brought up some instances I'd had directly doing pro-Tibet actions in Beijing itself, where we were followed by undercover security agents, and actually had spent a brief amount of time in detention. And so there's it felt very much like that, like we're going to follow you, we're going to track you, we're going to try and intimidate you. And I remember thinking, oh wow, like that was the first time I realized that sort of intimidation was moving online. And that definitely marked a new chapter, I feel, I know at least for my involvement in Students for Free Tibet's involvement in the Tibet movement, and receiving that kind of online phishing, but also sort of intimidation tactic that has just continued to escalate. And I know, especially for Tibetans, I'm not Tibetan, so for me, it wasn't nearly as intimidating than I know for my Tibetan colleagues, and especially those with family and relatives inside Tibet. And, you know, I remember thinking at the time, oh, it must just be so hard to live day in and day out with sort of the authorities constantly looking over you, especially inside Tibet, you know. And now it's going to happen to people on their phones, on their computers, and that's what we've seen. But also now what Tibet Action is working so hard to combat, and the digital resilience, and to protect the Tibetan community.
To be very frank, I have come a long way, I think, and this is something I think we can't underestimate, or we have to be really mindful of, in terms of the people that we work with, that we train, and just what these kind of attacks, cyber attacks, hacking attacks, just like malicious targeted attacks, what they do to people psychologically and emotionally. Because I did, for some time, especially during really intense work periods, especially where we were trying to do confidential things, or where Tibetans inside Tibet could be at risk, or our work could be at risk, it really, I have to be honest and say, it impacted me in a negative way. It made me stressed and overly paranoid, and also caused a lot of worry. I think I was at a point in my life where I had a lot of responsibility, especially in the days of Students for a Free Tibet. I mean, on the one hand, I think being targeted for someone like me who's engaged in the struggle, openly challenging and fighting the Chinese government and their occupation of Tibet, to be very frank, it is reassuring that I must be doing something right. We must be doing something right for them to come after us in a targeted way. So I think that's always my perspective and a gut reaction and feeling.
What I remember very clearly was, I think that was in 2012 when we really came under Chinese attack. At that time, I think that was actually the first time when our website got compromised. One time when, I don't know whether it's targeted, but my email, I mean, for several days continuously, I began to, I kept getting a lot of spam emails. It was not just 20, 30, it was like 100 to 200 every day. So we had a hard time also. We usually broadcast our program to the Tibetans inside Tibet through mainly shortwave radio. So what the Chinese usually do in those times were, jamming our radio transmissions in the air. So in that time, our fight with the Chinese usually happens in the air. And I think that was in 2012 when we first got, when our website got compromised. I think that was the time I realized, the fight with the Chinese censorship it kind of took reshaped into entirely different. Now it's the internet.
At one time, when we opened the TibetTimes.net website, there's some bots from the background, and we're just creating taking information from the users who are using the Tibetan website. And on a later date, and on some other occasions, we do happen, TibetTimes had been, I think it's been hacked. When we enter TibetTimes.net into any browser, it is just redirected to some other pages, and we are quite sure that it's been the Chinese government's behind that.
I think the first reaction was getting proud of the fact that I kind of realized that whatever work we were doing was actually making an impact on the Chinese authorities, and this is why they are, of course, doing that exactly. So that was the first reaction. And like I said earlier, I kind of realized that this was something new to us at that time, and I had no clue what to do.
uh, when when this kind of like hackings happens to tibettime.net, so at that point of time, like it's the work that Tibet Times does normally, giving information to the society, as to all the readers around the world, what's happening inside Tibet, and the breaking news, some breaking news inside Tibet, and also the news which we are providing to the general public on day-to-day basis, has been compromised, like because we can't deliver on that on time. So during this process of like several days, it does affect the news flow that Tibet Times usually does, has been can't deliver on right time to the general public.
The fact that we are not able to reach our audience on time. We are a news media, and our job was to get the news and information about Tibet to the Tibetans inside Tibet right on time. And we couldn't do that for several days because of that attack.
The viewers who just visit our Tibetan websites has been their computer has been compromised because of like having this all those bots and all those things, like malicious attacks and all those happens on their personal computers. For us personally, that as working in Tibet Times, it's a very annoying and very worrisome, because we can't do that. We can't tackle these situations as and when it happened, because of the resources that we are lacking in the Tibetan community as a whole, like where there are not hackers and who can create who can resolve these issues at a given point of time. So it's a long process, and it's a very heartbreaking moment, like because we can't able to cope up with these attacks at the very point of time and the need of time. So it's take us several days to resolve such an issue.
And personally, to be very frank, I remember being emotionally drained for several days because of that. Of course, as a journalist, all our efforts were put into, producing that program for the day. And because of that attack, because of the fact that we are not able to reach our audience, I felt that, all of our efforts have gone wasted. So that was really emotionally very heavy for me. And I also realized that, you really have to think about, like I said, now that was like a new age when the censorship comes through the Chinese government, not through radio transmission, but through internet. And that kept me thinking on the internet has its advantages, but it also brings about a lot of disadvantages, and we have to think about how to keep a fine balance in that.
I've possibly lost count, which does not necessarily mean it's been too often. But if I have to count, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps 6-7 times when I was aware that I was targeted. Me turning very cautious and suspicious of every email is something that I've never been that way. This is one way that my entire workplace would be compromised, not just myself, but my colleagues as well. So I've been very conscious of that fact, and making sure that whatever links that I've been sent, I don't really press on it. And basically, I think I've become suspicious of every email that I receive, particularly from those that I'm not aware of, that I don't know of.
During 2018 to 2021 July, some person tried to impersonate. So at that time, from Central Tibetan Women Association, we sent each and every respective NGOs and institution the mail which is sent by the media bureau. So we explained and we notified them to the letter which is sent by the media bureau is not from us. So we clarified the mail, fraud mail.
I wouldn't say I've become paranoid about the whole thing, but I've certainly become suspicious, and that is one way of suppression. Information is something that we all are very actively happy about, honestly, whenever, because I think we work in a space where we want to learn, we want to know, but then if we are uncomfortable, scared of information, I think this is one way of how Chinese Communist Party and its suppression has worked on human rights defenders in free countries. So it's just not fair.
As activists, we are very important and we are keeping very secret of our files. So if they use some fraud and fake email address, then they will damage our organization, and they also will become nobody will trust our organization, because somebody did fake. They create a fake news, and then later on we'll get a very we get into a trouble, and then we'll face a very problem. Then nobody will trust us.
Would say that there were times when self-immolation has taken place inside Tibet, and I've received email about that. I've received WhatsApp message about that, and I've almost been compromised. And I would inform these, give this experience, share these experiences with my colleagues and people who are curious about how I work. And my only motive is usually, how they should remain cautious as well, because, it's not just Tibetans inside Tibet, but how we in Tibetan, in free countries can be compromised.